My name is Isabel Turner, 23 years old, born and raised in Des Moines, Iowa. I'm in my final semester of a communications program at a local community college, juggling two part-time jobs. Mornings at a campus cafe, evenings restocking shelves at a 24-hour convenience store. Every dollar I earn gets split three ways: one part for saving up to move out, one for tuition, and the rest to contribute to household expenses in the home I share with my parents and younger sister. Carly. Carly is 19, dropped out halfway through a nursing program because it was too stressful, according to my mother. In reality, it was the parties, shopping sprees, and sleeping through exams. Still, my parents treat her like she's some flawless Disney princess. And me? I'm expected to be self-reliant, reasonable, the one who holds everything together, without a single complaint. Our house sits in a quiet neighborhood in the southern part of the city. I used to think of it as a home, but now it feels more like a pressure chamber. Every time I walk through the front door, it's like stepping into a space where all my efforts go unnoticed. My father, Gerald, looks at me not with affection, but calculation, as if to ask, what else can this daughter do for this family? That morning started like any other. I got up at 6:30, slipped on my dark brown uniform, tied up my hair, and tiptoed downstairs for coffee. My mom, Sharon, stood at the coffee machine, eyes glued to her phone. "Morning, Mom." "Yeah, Isabel?" she replied without looking up. "Oh, and later today, make sure to drive Carly to pick up her hair dye at the salon. She already placed the order." I froze. It was my birthday. I wasn't expecting cake or expensive gifts. But at the very least, a birthday wish? Nothing. I inhaled slowly, pressed my lips together, and nodded like always. Then I noticed my laptop wasn't on the kitchen counter. My silver MacBook Air, which I'd bought 6 months ago after saving nearly a year's worth of cafe tips. I had placed it there last night after finishing an internship application to New York. "Where's my laptop?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. Still focused on her phone, Mom responded in a tone so flat it was almost cruel. "Oh, your dad took it over to Wayne's place. His daughter needs a computer for school." I stood frozen. For a second, I thought I'd misheard. "What? I bought that with my own money. It's mine." "Well, you still live here," she said flatly. "Everything in this house is shared property. Carly needed a new phone. Your dad traded the laptop for an iPhone for her. Makes perfect sense." I couldn't believe it. The words echoed like a fire alarm in my head. They stole from me. Not for the first time, but this time it was shameless. I clenched my jaw, grabbed my phone, and texted my dad. "Dad, why did you take my laptop without asking?" 1 minute later, he replied, "Carly needed a new phone. You should know your place, and next week you'll pay her tuition $5,500. Be grateful we feed and house you." I went numb. My phone trembled in my hands. My cheeks burned, but inside, I felt nothing. No rage, no sadness, just that sensation like someone had dumped a bucket of ice water straight into my chest. I typed back, "Not happening." His response came within seconds. "Then get out. Don't expect another dime from us." I didn't respond. I walked quietly back to my room, shut the door, locked it, and leaned my back against it. The sounds of the house buzzed beyond the walls, but I couldn't hear them anymore. I knew, from that moment on, nothing would ever be the same. I stayed frozen behind the locked door, clutching my phone like letting go would send me straight into a bottomless pit. My room held only a bed by the window, a few old photo frames, and the closet Carly often raided whenever she needed a surprise party dress. The laptop was gone, and my birthday had been buried under chores and eviction texts. I had endured quietly for years, believing that if I worked hard enough, someone in this family would notice, would be grateful. But in the end, I was nothing more than a walking ATM and Carly's unpaid babysitter. A new message buzzed on my phone. I didn't want to look, but I did. From Carly. "You're blowing this way out of proportion. If you can't help the family, at least don't make it harder." My chest tightened. not because of her words, but the coldness in them. She didn't even realize she was benefiting from something taken directly from me. I grabbed my small backpack and quietly opened my desk drawer. From the back corner, I pulled out an envelope I had hidden for nearly a year. Inside was $1,800 in cash, my emergency savings. I'd planned to use it for a security deposit on a studio apartment near campus. But Mom once told me, living at home saves money. Save it for something big. Turns out that something big was Carly's new phone. I messaged the only person I could think of, Lena Daniels, a classmate from freshman year who now lived with her boyfriend in Cedar Falls. Can I crash for a night or two? Something happened at home. It's bad. Message marked seen in 3 minutes. Then my phone rang. Isabel, are you okay? You sound like you just got tossed off a moving train. Because I did, just not the literal kind. I gave her a short version while packing clothes, documents, and my thesis notebook. Lena didn't ask questions, she just said one thing. Come over. My door's open. At 11 p.m., I slipped out through the back door. No one in the house noticed. Carly's bedroom light was still on, music spilling out from the Bluetooth speaker I had bought with my end-of-semester bonus. I drove my old Toyota Corolla, what my dad used to call that useless junker, through the dense April fog of Iowa. At the Southridge intersection, my phone buzzed again. From Dad. If you tell anyone about this, don't even think about coming back. I stared at the screen, my hands turning pale as I gripped the steering wheel. Then I tapped the message, held it, and hit screenshot. I wasn't planning to use it immediately, but I had learned something over the past few years. Never rely on words alone. Always keep proof. When I arrived at Lena's apartment, it was well past midnight. She and her boyfriend Josh were waiting on the third-floor landing. Lena hugged me like I had just crawled out of a hurricane. I cleared out the office room. It's not huge, but you'll be able to breathe. I nodded, still stunned that I was receiving more warmth from near strangers than from people I shared blood with. That night, curled up on a sofa by the window, I didn't cry. Instead, I opened the Notes app on my phone and started listing what I lost. Laptop at $2,000. My mother's documents. A job application. A place to live. A trust. What I still have. $1,800 in cash. A car. My email account. Evidence. Willpower. I titled the list The Restart Plan. I didn't know what life would look like after this night, but one thing was crystal clear. I wasn't going back to that house. Not when my kindness had been treated like an obligation. Not when my birthday had become the day I was traded like excess inventory. And definitely not when the only person I had left to protect was myself. I woke up around 6 a.m. in Lena's small room filled with books and sketchboards. My neck ached from sleeping sideways on the stiff armchair. Morning sunlight streamed through the cream-colored curtain, landing on my backpack in the corner. The only thing I brought when I left home. Everything else, clothes, study materials, memories, was still in the room. Carly now treated as her personal storage. Lena knocked gently and came in holding a mug of hot coffee. I made your favorite, vanilla hazelnut. You're a lifesaver. I hugged the mug like I was holding onto the last bit of warmth. After a few minutes of silence, I finally said, I need to go back and get my stuff, and I need to make things clear. I can't let them keep doing this. Lena set the mug down and stared at me. You're going to confront them alone? No, I want them to see the consequences. This time, no one gets to treat me like an ATM again. I grabbed my phone, opened the Notes app, and started listing what I needed to collect. Bank statements, all those withdrawals my dad called temporary family loans. Utility bills, insurance, all under my name since I was 19. Receipts from Carly, the 3 times I paid for car repairs, 2 repeat class fees, 1 incident where she borrowed my credit card and never paid it back. Text messages, emails, any conversation related to them borrowing my assets. I wasn't just leaving, I wanted to leave a trail, a record of the truth, not for revenge, but to protect myself if things got worse. I'm coming with you, Lena said immediately. I'll wait in the car. If you're not back in 30 minutes, I'm calling the police. We arrived at my house at 8:43 a.m. The garage light was on, which meant my dad was still home. I took a deep breath and stepped out of the car, gripping the room key I still hadn't been stripped of. I entered through the back, trying to keep my steps quiet. The living room looked the same as always. TV on with no one watching. My dad's coat draped over the recliner. Carly's dirty shoes in the middle of the floor. My room, once familiar, felt eerily empty. The closet was wide open. Some clothes were missing. The navy moon dress I wore for my first-year presentation was gone. In its place, Carly's hoodie was flung across my bed like a territorial marker. I didn't have time to be angry. I went straight to the desk drawer and pulled out a folder. Inside the envelope labeled Tax and Bank, I found bank statements from Wells Fargo showing multiple transfers from my account to G. Turner, my dad's name. Next, I opened the small cabinet by the corner where I kept all the bills, over 20 documents from internet to water language. Every one listed Isabel Turner, current address. I used my phone to snap a photo of each one, every number, every detail. As I turned to head to the kitchen for more documents, my dad's voice rang out behind me. "What do you think you're doing here?" I turned around, holding his gaze. "I came to collect what's mine, and the proof that I've been carrying this family for the past 4 years. He scoffed. "You think a few silly papers are going to make anyone believe you? Family is about responsibility. You're still living here. Nothing here belongs to you." I held up my phone. "Everything's recorded. I don't need people to believe me. I just need a lawyer." His face darkened. He took a step forward. I backed up, phone ready to record. "Don't do anything stupid. I'm leaving now. But if anyone in this house touches my things again, I'll come back not alone." I ran upstairs, grabbed the last 3 outfits left, shoved them into my backpack. Before leaving, I placed a handwritten note on my desk. "Long last time. Everything has a limit, even people." I slipped out through the back door, heart pounding. When I got in the car, Lena didn't ask anything. She just handed me a bottle of water and turned on some quiet music. We stayed silent the whole drive home. But in my head, the pieces of truth were falling into place. Numbers, evidence, years of being invisible. That night, back at Lena's apartment, I sat on the floor of her study, back against the bookshelf, staring at the old laptop Josh had temporarily lent me. My fingers typed, non-stop. Not because I wanted to write, but because I needed to. I needed to document everything. I needed to leave behind something they couldn't deny. I opened each image file, cross-checked it with the receipts I had just photographed that morning, and started compiling a file, The Truth According to Isabel Turner. Page 1 listed all unauthorized withdrawals from my personal account, including every borrow and forget incident from my father. It totaled nearly $5,400 over 3 years, not counting the times cash disappeared from my wallet when I left my purse in the kitchen. Page 2 outlined utility, insurance, and internet bills I had consistently paid since I turned 19, while Carly was still a high school senior, and my parents insisted, "She's too young, she needs to focus on her future." Page 3 included a scanned receipt for the MacBook Air I bought, purchase date, serial number, warranty registration, and a picture of me holding the device at the downtown Des Moines store. Next to it, I added a screenshot of my dad's message. "Trade it for Carly's phone, you should be grateful." I also attached the online police report I had filed early that morning, titled Unauthorized Property Sale and Financial Coercion by Immediate Family. I knew it wasn't enough to get anyone into court, but it was a start, proof that I wasn't staying silent. I printed 2 copies of the file, placed them in clear report covers, and labeled them neatly. One stayed in my bag. The other, I'd leave somewhere they couldn't ignore. The next morning, I went back to the house. Lena parked a block away. I walked the rest of the way, emotionless, holding the file. The front door was unlocked. I entered through the kitchen. The familiar room felt eerily still. My mother was making coffee. She looked up in surprise when she saw me. "You're back, Isabel?" Her tone was calm, as if the blow-up 3 days ago had been a minor misunderstanding. No, just stopping by. I set the file down on the dining table, right where she usually read the morning news on her tablet. My voice was soft, but clear. I don't have anything left to give, but I'm leaving this. You should read it. She frowned, flipped through a few pages, then looked at me with an unreadable expression. Who are you trying to threaten with this? No one. I don't need to threaten anyone. I'm just stating facts. I turned to go, but at the door I paused. Mom, I wrote clearly in the file, if anything in there isn't resolved properly, I'll send the copy to the right people. And I already have legal support. I left the sentence hanging like a silent warning and walked out. 3 hours later, while Lena and I were picking vegetables at the farmer's market, my phone rang. Caller ID, Carly. I didn't answer. A text came through instantly. What did you leave behind? Mom's freaking out, Dad's calling a lawyer. Are you trying to blow this up? Another longer one. Why are you doing this? Is it over that laptop, or are you just jealous? Do you even know how much stress you've caused this family? I stared at the screen. Those words didn't hurt anymore, not even a little. That evening, I emailed a copy of the file to the legal aid clinic for Iowa student victims. An old high school friend was doing her internship there. I only wrote one line. I need advice about being financially exploited by family. I have clear evidence. Please guide me. The next morning, the reply came quickly. We'll arrange an online consultation next week. This is the first step. And you are not alone. I reread that last line 3 times. That night, for the first time in weeks, I played music in my room and let myself relax. Not because it was over, but because I knew I had started something that could not be undone. Less than 24 hours after I left the file, my phone started vibrating nonstop, as if someone were trying to pull me back into the same old spiral. The first message came from Mom. Isabel, this doesn't need to go that far. I know you're upset, but this is a family matter. You shouldn't be making it legal. An hour later, her voice was on voicemail, hoarse, dramatic. You're hurting everyone, don't you see? Your father hasn't been able to eat or sleep. Carly, she's panicking. I hung up. Not because I felt guilty, but because I was tired of the role reversal game. They hurt me for years, but the moment I spoke up, all eyes turned to me, like I was the cause. By late afternoon, Carly called. I hesitated a few seconds before picking up. What are you doing? I'm not do anything, Carly. I just left the truth. That pile of papers? Dad got so mad he smashed his phone on the floor. Mom's been crying all morning. Are you trying to destroy this family? I leaned against the wall, kept my voice steady. I'm not destroying anything. I'm just done allowing myself to be exploited. Carly went quiet for a few seconds. Then her tone softened, sounding uncertain. You know, when Mom read the part about you paying for my car repair last year, I realized I never asked. I thought Dad covered it, or maybe it came from the scholarship. I closed my eyes. There it was, the crack. What scholarship? I asked softly. The education fund Grandma and Grandpa set up for the both of us when we were kids. Dad told me I had full access. I used it for freshman and sophomore year, but yesterday I overheard Mom saying something about not realizing both funds were gone. When I asked, they clammed up. My heart skipped. You mean my fund was used for you too? I didn't know, Isabel, I swear. I thought it was mine. I thought it was split evenly. I let out a laugh, thin and sharp like a paper cut. Nothing was split. I juggled 2 jobs while you went to school on money I didn't even know was missing. And you call that family? Carly didn't argue. She exhaled. Before, I thought you were just mad about a laptop, but now I get it. They weren't just unfair to you. They lied to me too. I said nothing, let the silence spread like ink on paper. What are you going to do next? Carly asked after a pause. I looked up at the ceiling, where Elena's soft yellow light cast quiet shadows. I don't know yet, but I'm not going back. I'm going to reclaim what's mine, and if they don't cooperate, I'll take it further. That night, I received an email from Lauren, my friend interning at the Iowa Student Legal Aid Organization. Isabel, I've read your file. I showed it to my supervisor. They want to set up a meeting with you next Tuesday to go over everything. They say your case has strong legal standing. I sat in silence for several minutes after reading it. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because being believed after years of being dismissed felt strangely unfamiliar. The next morning, I woke up to a message from someone I didn't expect. From Grandma. Ruth Turner. Can you come see me? I've heard what's going on, and I think it's time I shared some truths. I stared at that message, heart pounding. Grandma Ruth, my dad's mother, had always stayed out of family conflicts. She lived in Cedar Rapids, almost a 2-hour drive from Des Moines, and was seen as neutral. She never took sides, never got involved. But if she was the one reaching out, I called her back. She answered instantly. Isabel, thank you for calling back. I want to see you. I've kept quiet about many things for too long, but maybe silence isn't right anymore. Her voice didn't waver. It wasn't frail as I remembered. It sounded like she had been waiting for this conversation for a very long time. I drove to Cedar Rapids on a gray Saturday afternoon. It wasn't raining, but the sky was gloomy enough to weigh heavy on the heart. Ruth Turner's house sat at the end of a cobblestone road, surrounded by maple trees that had just begun to turn. I had never been here alone. The last time I clearly remembered, I was 14, and Carly was sitting in Grandma's lap asking for cookies. She opened the door before I even reached the bell, as if she'd been standing there waiting, still the same petite figure, her white hair neatly pinned up and sharp eyes that hadn't dulled despite being nearly 80. And come in, Isabel. I've made tea. We sat in the living room, surrounded by classic landscape paintings and a faint scent of lavender in the air. She handed me a cup of mint tea and said nothing for the first few minutes, just looked at me like she was seeing someone clearly for the first time under the right light. I read the file you left for your parents. I nodded. I also talked to Carly. I looked up. And you believe me? I don't need to believe. The truth lies in the numbers. She got up, walked into her office, then returned with a thick envelope. Placing it on the table, she pushed it toward me. Open it. I think you should have known this a long time ago. Inside was a copy of a trust agreement dated back to 2005, the year I turned 3. The trust was established by my grandfather, Thomas Turner. The initial amount was $30,000, split evenly into 2 separate trusts, one for me, one for Carly. Your grandfather always believed in education. Before he passed, he appointed me as co-trustee. But when he died, your father convinced me to relinquish my role, saying the next generation should take responsibility. I was too weak to fight back then. I sat in silence. Every word hit like a nail into the already shattered foundation of my trust. Gerald promised he wouldn't touch your education fund. But when Carly went to college, the money started disappearing. You were never informed about this fund, were you? I shook my head. Said we didn't qualify for financial aid, so I worked part-time, took out student loans, and lived at home to save money. I believed him. She stared at me for a long time. Then she said slowly, Gerald used your trust to cover Carly's second-year tuition after she lost her scholarship. Nearly all your fund was drained in just 18 months. I wasn't shocked anymore, just an empty space carved deeper inside my chest. And Carly, she didn't know, she added. She thought that was her share. You think she's selfish, but she was deceived too. I leaned back in the chair, my hands tightening around the cup. What do you plan to do? Ruth sat up straight. I called your grandfather's attorney, the one who drafted the original trust. We're requesting a full financial audit, and if necessary, we'll go to court. That last part stopped me cold. You mean, sue my father? Not for revenge, just for clarity. You can't move forward if the past keeps weighing you down. I nodded, though my mind hadn't caught up with everything yet. And Carly? If she truly wants to make things right, she'll find a way. She paused, then said sharply but quietly, "If not, she's no different from Gerald." Before I left, she handed me a scanned copy of the trust documents and a meeting notice with Mr. Raymond Ellis, the family lawyer, for next Wednesday at his office in downtown Des Moines. "You don't have to do this alone anymore." I left Cedar Rapids after sunset, the golden hour lighting up one side of the road. The file sat on the passenger seat beside me. My heart was quiet, but no longer cold, because for the first time in years, someone was standing with me. And for the first time in my life, I knew one thing for sure. They weren't going to get away with this quietly. I moved out of Lena's apartment early the following week, after Mrs. Ruth called to inform me that she had just purchased a small unit in the Beaverdale neighborhood, less than a 15-minute drive from my campus. "You need a decent place to begin again," she said, her voice gentle but resolute. I was about to refuse, but she added, "It's not a favor, Isabel, it's an investment." The apartment sat on the second floor of a red brick triplex with a large window facing a small park and an open kitchen topped with light gray granite counters. I never thought I'd cry over a kitchen, but when I placed the first cup on the shelf and didn't hear anyone say, "Stop making a mess," I actually broke down. Josh helped me reinstall the old hard drive into the laptop I had reclaimed. My dad's neighbor, Mr. Wallace, had returned it after realizing what had really happened. "I didn't know they took it from their daughter," he wrote on a slip of paper. "Truly sorry." No embellishments. I appreciated that more than any excuse my parents could have given. When I powered it on and saw the folder titled Thesis Final Drafts, it felt like recovering a piece of my soul that had been abandoned. All the files were intact: job portfolios, recommendation letters, writing samples. I took screenshots, then backed them up in 3 different cloud drives, almost like I was afraid someone might take them again. A few days later, I applied for a part-time marketing assistant position at a startup called Maple and Crest, focused on educational technology. I found the job posting on a student bulletin board and submitted my application that same night. The next morning, I got a call from the CEO. "Tasha." "Nope." "I was impressed by how you presented your materials," she said. "Clean, clear, and honest. Can you come in for an interview this afternoon?" I arrived 20 minutes early, wearing an old white blouse, carefully ironed, carrying the laptop that now held a kind of battle scar. The interview wasn't like any I'd had before. Tasha didn't ask about grades or awards. She just looked at me and asked, "When was the last time you overcame an unfair situation?" I looked at her and told part of my story. Not to complain, but because I've learned that some wounds stop bleeding only when they're finally named. 3 days later, I received a job offer. The pay wasn't high, but the hours were flexible and the environment was professional. I was set to begin the following week. On the same time, Lauren introduced me to a therapist named Dr. Amy Heller, who had worked with many clients dealing with financial manipulation in families. Our first session was in a cozy office with thick upholstered armchairs and a large bookshelf in the corner. "I'm not here to blame anyone," I said as I sat down. "Good," she smiled. "I'm not here to teach you that either. But we will explore how you learn to stay silent, and why now it matters that you speak." I didn't respond right away, but that day, for the first time, I talked about being 16 when I applied for a full scholarship and my dad showed zero interest. When I won the Iowa State Speech Award and no family came. When I discovered Carly had used my credit card to buy her prom dress and Mom just said, "She just borrowed it." We met every Friday at 3 p.m., and gradually the broken pieces started to make sense. I hadn't just been financially exploited. I had been taught that my worth was defined by how much I sacrificed for others. By the end of the month, I got an email from Tasha offering me my first solo project, designing a media campaign for a scholarship program targeting underprivileged students. I hesitated for a second before replying yes, but this time not out of fear of missing a chance. because I knew I was ready to lead it. That evening, while making coffee in my tiny kitchen, I got a text from Carly. "Are you okay? I know it's not enough, but I'm sorry." I stared at the screen, didn't reply right away, because my life no longer revolves around forgiveness. It revolves around rebuilding myself, one decision at a time. From a small apartment, an old laptop, to the first job held by someone learning to stand without needing anyone's permission. 1 month after my first meeting with attorney Raymond Ellis, the formal hearing about my trust fund was held at Polk County Court. I arrived early, wearing a navy new suit borrowed from Lauren. It fit eerily well. Carly sat beside me, clutching her purse, lightly made up but with eyes red from sleeplessness. Across the room were my parents. My father sat with arms crossed and a frozen expression, while my mother dabbed at the corners of her eyes with a tissue whenever someone glanced her way. But this time, no one bought the tears. When the judge requested a document review, Raymond presented everything clearly. Evidence of the unauthorized withdrawals from the trust, banking records, testimony from the original overseers, my grandparents, and finally a copy of my father's false declaration submitted to the fund's governing body. The court acknowledges that Mr. Gerald Turner unlawfully used the entire amount belonging to Isabel Turner without beneficiary consent and intentionally concealed the fund's existence from the rightful trustee. There was no need for a rebuttal. The evidence was undeniable. The court ruled, all misappropriated funds, totaling $28,400, must be reimbursed to Isabel within 90 days. Gerald Turner is permanently banned from handling any future family trusts. The remaining trust balance will be overseen by an independent manager, supervised by a court-appointed attorney. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. That formal recognition in clear daylight and legal language was enough to close a painful chapter. After the hearing, Carly followed me out into the hallway. "You don't have to forgive me, but I'm grateful you let me be there. You could have kept me away, but you knew I needed to understand." I turned to her. Forgiveness doesn't mean erasure. It means choosing not to let it define everything else. Carly nodded. We didn't hug. But for the first time, between two women raised to compete for love, something softened. In June, I received an official raise from Maple and Crest and the chance to coordinate a small project. Tasha placed a hand on my shoulder during a Monday morning meeting and whispered, "You didn't just make it through, you're paving the way." That was the day I received a second email from Ms. Ruth. "Dear Isabel, if you don't mind, I'd like to gift you something. The little wooden cabin in Okoboji. Your grandfather used to take me camping there in the summers. I don't use it anymore, but it deserves to hold warmth again. I drove to Okoboji that weekend with Josh, Lena's boyfriend, now my close friend. It took us 3 hours, but when I opened the wooden door to the cabin by the lake, I understood instantly. This wasn't just a gift. It was a preserved piece of my family's soul. The cabin had a porch, a fireplace, and old framed photographs lining the hallway. On a shelf sat my grandfather Thomas's journal, pages of summer memories with Ruth, entries about repainting the roof by hand, taking Carly and me to catch fireflies. I didn't remember those moments, but I could feel them alive in the wood grain. I decided to keep the cabin's essence intact, but renovate part of it to become a summer writing retreat for students studying creative writing or communications, people like me, who once needed a place to hear their own voice. A month later, on my 24th birthday, I hosted a small dinner in my Beaverdale apartment. Lauren was there, and so were Tasha, Josh, Lena, and Carly. We made homemade pizza, drank chilled soda, and laughed until our stomachs hurt over trivia games I had created. When it came time for cake, Carly stood up and held out a small envelope. "I don't have a big gift, but I've been working part-time at the campus library. Here's the first $600 toward what I owe you. And if you'll have me, I'd love to help you fix up the cabin in Okoboji during break." I looked at my sister and nodded. No big speech, no dramatic reconciliation, That night, I stepped onto the balcony with a drink in hand, staring at the quiet city sky. What filled my heart wasn't the fact that I had reclaimed everything, but that I was no longer losing myself. And this journey ultimately wasn't about leaving it all behind, but about how I came back, whole, one step at a time. Isabel's story is a powerful reminder that sometimes freedom begins the moment you dare to say enough to the very people you once trusted. In real life, many are exploited under the guise of family duty until they finally rise up to reclaim their worth and the right to lead their own lives. Isabel didn't just recover the finances that were taken from her, she found herself, her freedom, and a future built on her own choices, not blind sacrifice. What do you think about Isabel's journey? What would you do if you were in her place? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to follow the channel for more heartfelt, thought-provoking stories about family and life. My name is Mary Whitmore, 36 years old, currently living in Austin, Texas. Today's the Whitmore family's annual gathering, an event where anyone not wearing a Rolex or carrying a Hermes bag is glanced at like they just crawled out of a basement. I've grown far too familiar with that feeling. Every year, they meet at my uncle's estate in the Dallas suburbs, where Porsches, Mercedes-AMGs, and BMW M8s line the marble-tiled driveway. I quietly parked my over 8-year-old Subaru Forester at the end of the street, far from the judging eyes. I entered the foyer in a navy blue blazer I had bought during an end-of-season sale at an outlet store, brandless, unremarkable. As expected, the first eyes that landed on me belonged to Olivia, my cousin, 3 years older, who lives off her husband's credit cards, but always speaks as if she runs a multinational corporation. "Oh, Mary, still sticking to that, minimalist style," Olivia said, her eyes sweeping over my flats like she was spotting a clearance rack reject. I smiled, but didn't respond. Not worth the burden. Across the room, my uncle, Mr. Paul Whitmore, stood with a champagne glass in hand, laughing loudly with a group of oil investors from Houston. He was once my father's closest friend until a car crash took both my parents away. After that, Uncle Paul assumed the role of organizing family meetings, as if he were single-handedly carrying the dynasty. The room reeked of designer perfume and empty compliments. Enlarged photos hung on the walls: Ethan's Malibu mansion, my cousin, Julia's luxury yacht recently purchased with her husband in Florida, Uncle Paul's eldest daughter. The last photo was mine, taken during a financial literacy summit in Denver. Tucked away in a dim corner, blurred like a memory nobody cared to recall. Julia approached, a glass of red wine swirling in hand, her eyes gleaming with calculated pity. "Still living in that downtown apartment, Mary? So consistent of you. I know a few realtors who could help you upgrade a little, if you're ready." I maintained a polite smile. I'd heard those kinds of digs more often than my morning alarm. Dinner began with a high-end appetizer, pan-seared scallops drizzled in white wine sauce, served on bone china rimmed with gold. I sat amid conversations about investment returns, a new resort in the Bahamas, and the latest spike in tech stocks. When I brought up a community project I'd been working on helping single mothers access financial tools, no one asked a follow-up question. "Mary, you should consider building a stronger personal brand," Ethan said, smirking. "No one's really into this community service thing anymore. Kids need to learn how to make real money." The entire table burst into laughter. I looked down at the neatly folded napkin in front of me, a chill running up my spine. They never truly wanted to know what I did. To them, I was the stubborn cousin, the traditional one, the one who didn't seize opportunity. They didn't understand or care that I had chosen a different life, not because I lacked options, but because I refused to fake one. After dessert, as everyone stood up to mingle, Olivia leaned toward Julia, making no effort to lower her voice. "I honestly don't get why Mary even comes to these things. She doesn't belong here." Julia chuckled, shrugging. "Maybe she's hoping someone will offer her a job, or a husband." I stepped out onto the balcony. The night air was cold and quiet. Below stretched the lawn where tomorrow they'd erect the stage for the family's annual financial presentations. I knew exactly what was coming, another round of public wealth comparison, where I'd once again rank at the bottom, at least based on the numbers they thought they knew. I was 12 when my world shattered into 1,000 pieces. It was a Friday afternoon. A thunderstorm had just passed over Texas, and the scent of wet asphalt still lingered in the air. My mom called, telling me to pack for our weekend camping trip. But their pickup truck never made it to the lakeside site we'd planned for. The chain reaction crash on Highway 290 took both my parents in a matter of seconds. They said it happened fast, no pain, no time to react, but the numbness that settled in my heart was slow and merciless. It stretched over the years that followed. I moved in with my grandmother, June Whitmore, the only person in the family who had never treated me like a burden. Her home sat in South San Antonio, a weathered 3-bedroom wooden house with a backyard full of basil and mint. There were no luxury cars, no curved screen TVs on the wall, but it held something I'd never seen at Uncle Paul's mansion or Aunt Olivia's condo: peace. Grandma June wasn't the type to say, "I love you," every night, but she showed it in the way she folded my clothes neatly, left her job at the bookstore anytime I had a fever, and always saved me the window seat when we read the morning paper together. But what made her special wasn't just her kindness. It was her razor-sharp mind and no-nonsense approach to money that no other Whitmore had inherited. She was the first person to teach me how to check a credit report, read a balance sheet, and understand the difference between being rich and being sustainably wealthy. "Don't be fooled by shiny surfaces," she said when I asked why she still drove her 1999 Ford Taurus. "Truly wealthy people don't need anyone to know they're wealthy." On Saturday nights, while kids my age watched superhero movies or played video games, I sat on the cold wooden floor with her, highlighting property price charts from black and white financial newsletters. She gave me a little notebook for investment tracking. The first line she wrote in purple ink: "Make money work for you. Don't work for money for." When I turned 14, she showed me her own portfolio. Not flashy, but shockingly clever. A series of modest properties scattered around recovering neighborhoods, bought low, rented steadily, all under LLCs that no one knew were run by a silver-haired lady. At 15, she let me invest a small amount, $200 I had saved from weekend bake sales, into a mutual fund she helped me pick. I had to track its monthly movements, report on it, and write reflections on market trends. Back then, I didn't understand why she took that little money so seriously. Only later did I realize she wasn't teaching me how to get rich. She was teaching me how to live without depending on anyone's approval. Each summer, while my cousins vacationed in Europe or Hawaii, Grandma took me to abandoned property auctions. We drove through scorching heat, sat for hours in courtrooms, took notes, and analyzed risks. No one in the family knew. If they had, they would have laughed. "Mary's pretending to be an investor with high school savings?" A few months before she passed, Grandma called me into her room and handed me a bundle of documents tied with a faded indigo ribbon. Inside were the legal records for a small parcel of land in the East Terrace neighborhood, an area just starting to draw interest from developers. "Mary," she said, her eyes cloudy from heart failure, "keep this as your first foundation. As for the rest, I trust you'll know how to build it." After she died, I didn't return to the family estate for years. They held a funeral, but didn't let me speak. Uncle Paul called Grandma June a good woman, but too frugal. That line made me leave the cemetery earlier than planned. I used the little money she left me, plus scholarships, to study finance, but the real lessons, I had already mastered those before I turned 18. I once believed that graduating college and landing a stable job would make family gatherings more bearable. I was wrong. Completely wrong. In the Whitmore clan, no one cared about degrees unless they came with a photo captioned, "New home in Scottsdale," or "Swiss vacation on private jet." Every reunion felt like a material status showcase, where the loudest, flashiest, and most extravagant person always sat at the head of the table. Uncle Paul, the center of every conversation, had an annoying habit casually asking about everyone's income under the guise of concern. "So, Mary, how's that public finance work going? Decent salary?" he asked, feigning surprise as if still confused why I hadn't jumped into venture capital like his son. I just smiled. I was used to it. Aunt Cheryl, his younger sister, always arrived flaunting a new handbag worth more than the average monthly rent in Austin. Last week, she closed a deal on a penthouse in Miami Beach. No one asked about the mortgage attached to it, just oohed and awed over infinity pool photos and iPad-controlled glass doors. Then there was Julia, Uncle Paul's eldest daughter, now an investment partner in a startup likely bankrolled more by parental money than merit. She recently bragged about buying a Franck Muller watch with her quarterly bonus, though I knew for a fact she was paying off credit card debt at an interest rate close to 22%. That dinner, the whole table buzzed about an upcoming yacht show in Naples. Ethan, my cousin, freshly divorced for the second time, beamed as he spoke about the new Mercedes G-Class he'd bought to rebalance emotionally post-breakup. "Gotta reward yourself, right, Mary? Life's not all about pinching pennies," he laughed, turning to me. "Oh, wait, you're probably not into that luxury stuff." I calmly set down my fork and knife. I didn't need to respond. Olivia cut in, as usual, with a voice sharp as a razor. "I heard someone's been buying property in up-and-coming suburbs. Cheap now, but with long-term growth potential. Didn't you mention a place called Round Rock?" All eyes turned toward me, some curious, others condescending. What they didn't know was that I quietly owned 3 apartment complexes in that area through anonymous LLCs and brought in more rent each month than Julia's entire salary. But I simply smiled, sipped my water, and replied, "Well, I'm not great at predicting the future with yachts or Swiss watches, just trying to do something sustainable." The dinner rolled on with half laughs and sidelong glances. I was long familiar with how they measured a person's worth through golf club memberships and platinum credit card fees. But here's what they didn't know. I never played by their rules. I didn't need Instagram posts to prove I was doing fine. I didn't need a Tesla badge to hear, "Wow, classy," at the gas station. I didn't need their understanding. I just needed the right moment to show them. And that moment was coming very soon. While they fussed over which shade of Italian marble to install in the 4th kitchen of their vacation homes, I had just closed a deal to buy the very building where 3 of them lived, under the name Everlyn Properties, LLC, with no paper trail linking it to Mary Whitmore. Every month, their rent payments were wired to an account they believed belonged to an out-of-state investment fund. None of them had a clue that the person they called Simple Mary, Conservative Mary, or Mary who can't keep up with the times, held the keys to the roof over their heads. I started with a rundown single-story house on the east side of San Marcos, Texas, a property the realtor called an untouched mess no one wanted. But I was different. I saw copper piping still intact, a solid foundation, and a location just off a soon-to-be-developed road I had quietly tracked for 6 months. I bought it with savings from my financial consulting work and the first dividends from my portfolio. The deed was filed under Whitmore Ventures, LLC, a limited liability company I created and managed through a small law office in Houston. No one in my family had any clue. To them, I was still Mary, the woman driving an old Subaru, wearing off-brand blazers and living in a small downtown apartment. But every brick I touched was a step in the long-term plan I learned from my grandmother. I renovated the house, rented it out on a 1-year lease at a rate over 30% higher than the area average, thanks to smart upgrades and modern amenities. 4 months later, I refinanced, pulled cash from the appreciated value, and used it to buy the next property. I repeated that cycle for 6 years. No one saw me do it. There were no Facebook photos holding new house keys, no grand openings. I worked quietly, buying homes, small buildings, and eventually expanding into commercial properties. Sometimes I used as many as 4 separate companies to protect my identity, all designed to keep Mary Whitmore out of public records. As of now, I own a total of 15 properties, including 9 small rental units spread across Round Rock, Pflugerville, and North Austin. 3 commercial complexes, one of which is a Class B office building on Lamar Boulevard, and most notably, a 5-story apartment building called the Dawson, where 3 of my family members currently live: Ethan, Julia, and Olivia with her husband. That building came from a deal most major investors passed on. The former owner needed a quick sale due to a divorce settlement. I approached it through Everlyn Properties, LLC, a subsidiary I created for handling sensitive acquisitions. The entire process closed in 3 weeks. Quiet, clean, unnoticed. Right after taking ownership, I upgraded the security system, installed electronic key access at all entry points, and added a guest check-in policy via app. Though I kept rent slightly below market rates to avoid suspicion, I started receiving tenant feedback, including from Julia, complaining that the new management's a bit much. Ethan called me the week after that family dinner, annoyed. "Mary, do you know who's managing the Dawson now? They changed the rules. Now you have to register overnight guests 3 days in advance. It's ridiculous." I kept typing out my quarterly earnings sheet as I listened, smiling softly. Maybe the new owner just wants to keep things secure. Who knows? It might even raise the building's value. He scoffed. "If I knew who owned it, I'd call them directly. This anonymous stuff, no one trusts that." I said nothing. I didn't need their trust. I needed their rent on time. A week later, I got an email from the third-party property management firm. Several residents, including Julia, have requested a meeting with the property owner regarding the new security policy. I declined. My schedule was full. I replied with one short paragraph. "Current policies are in place to protect the asset and the safety of all residents. Any requests will be recorded through the official management portal. Ownership does not meet with residents directly." That's how I built my empire, invisible but solid, adjusting the lights in the room without ever stepping through the door. They still think I'm at the bottom in this family race. But the truth is, I'm not even in that race. I'm buying the track, and they're running on my field, one step at a time. The next morning after the family gathering, I woke up in the attic room of Cedar Hollow, the ancestral estate on the west side of Fredericksburg, once owned by my grandmother, June Whitmore. The room still looked exactly the same as it had when she was alive. Faded floral wallpaper, an arched window overlooking the Vineyard Hills, and the oak vanity where she used to brush her hair every morning. For me, this was where all good memories began. I hadn't even left the bed when an email from Uncle Paul's assistant, the unofficial spokesperson for the Whitmore family, sent a chill down my spine. "Dear family members, as scheduled for this afternoon's family meeting, Mr. Paul will present a formal proposal to sell the Cedar Hollow estate to restructure the family's dormant assets. Please note that a vote will be held immediately after the presentation. Regards." I clenched the phone in my hand. Restructure dormant assets? In plain English, sell off the only home that still carried my grandmother's soul just to split the cash. That morning's breakfast was icy. I walked into the dining room with a black coffee in hand, just in time to hear Olivia brag about a $2.8 million offer from an out-of-state investor ready to buy land in Marble Falls, if the estate was taken care of this month. "Cedar Hollow sits on prime development land in the hill country," Uncle Paul declared, like he was pitching a construction project instead of discussing the home our grandmother spent 3 years personally designing. I sat next to Julia. She glanced at me with a half smile. "You should support selling the house, Mary. After all, you don't even live here." I placed my coffee cup on the table and kept my voice calm. "Not living here doesn't mean it doesn't belong to me." She raised an eyebrow, about to reply, but was cut off by Uncle Paul tapping his glass. That afternoon, the whole family gathered in the estate's main meeting room, the one with vaulted ceilings and stained glass windows, where my grandmother hosted her first Christmas after Grandpa passed. Now, it was where they planned to decide this house's fate. Uncle Paul stood at the head of the table, resting his hand on a brown leather-bound folder. "I understand Cedar Hollow holds emotional value, but emotions shouldn't hinder progress. This area is rising in value. If we sell the estate, we could evenly split the profits. Roughly $12 million after taxes and legal fees. Murmurs spread across the table. Some nodded. Ethan exclaimed, "That's a win." Julia started asking when the money would be distributed. I raised my hand. What gives us the right to sell what Grandma built with her life? This isn't just property, it's a symbol. Uncle Paul raised his brows, not in surprise, but in disdain. "Mary, you work in community outreach, right? Symbolic assets may sound poetic, but we're talking about tangible value. This is about numbers, not nostalgia." I swallowed the anger burning in my throat, not because of the words, but the tone. He had never believed I was qualified to speak on financial matters. "Do you know Grandma left a clause in her will that Cedar Hollow could only be sold with unanimous agreement?" He smirked. "Gloss applied while she was alive, Mary. We can revise it now. The asset is frozen in value while the heirs need liquidity. You should understand that if you have any investment knowledge at all." I met his gaze. "Then perhaps I should present some data." He paused, frowning. "What data?" I didn't answer. I stood up and pulled a USB from my pocket. Last night, I'd worked until nearly 3 a.m. preparing my presentation. I plugged it into the projector, and the screen lit up, showing a decade-long chart of hill country real estate values alongside a report on the cultural significance of heritage properties, assets that can't be priced in dollars alone. Frowns creased several faces. Julia looked confused. Ethan glanced toward Uncle Paul. Only one person smiled slightly. Jessica, my distant cousin and a lawyer, the only one who had never belittled me. Uncle Paul walked over to stand beside me. "What are you trying to prove with this?" I lifted my chin. "That if this family wants to sell the house like some product, I won't let it happen without a fight. Some things can't be divided into shares. Some things belong to blood, not balance sheets." The room fell silent, and in that moment, I knew this battle was just beginning. But I was ready, not because I wanted to fight my family, but because I was finally strong enough not to let them erase everything my grandmother ever built. I thought the data presentation I worked on last night would at least slow them down. Maybe I was too naive. The meeting entered the open discussion phase after Uncle Paul wrapped up the Cedar Hollow sale proposal with one last line. "Everyone needs cash flow. We can't hold on to a house forever just because of feelings." I hadn't even opened my mouth before Ethan spoke up. "You know, Mary, we really admire your persistence, but maybe it's time to be a little more realistic. No one blames you for not quite keeping up with the family's pace." I turned to him. "But then, what do you mean?" He shrugged, completely unfazed. I mean, the rest of us are out here investing, making returns, contributing to the family's assets. You're still driving that old Subaru and wearing off-brand clothes. We don't want you to keep stressing yourself out just to keep up appearances." Julia chimed in, her voice soft but laced with venom. "Exactly. You don't need to prove you're independent like that. We could set up a support fund. Just a small allowance for those who aren't quite financially self-sufficient yet." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Uncle Paul clapped gently as if trying to ease the tension, but only made everything worse. "Actually a great idea. Let's call it the Family Stabilization Fund. It'll help members with special circumstances not worry about basics like housing, transportation, or party attire. Mary, what do you think?" The whole room turned to me. A few people tried hiding their smirks behind their hands. Olivia didn't even bother. She looked at me with a mix of pity and scorn, then leaned over to whisper something to her husband. I sat still, fingers gripping the edge of the table. Inside my head, a wave was rising, churning between rage and exhaustion. I had ignored the condescending looks. I had brushed off the sarcastic remarks for years. But this, sitting there while they calmly discussed creating a relief fund for me, like I was some kind of failure leeching off the family, this crossed a line I didn't even know I had. I stood, slowly but not trembling. "Uncle Paul, if I understand correctly, you're suggesting the whole family pool money together so I don't suffer?" He nodded, with a face so serious it bordered on ridiculous. "Not charity, just temporary support. Everyone falls on hard times, Mary. You're just a little behind the curve. We're family, after all, right? I looked around the table, and everyone here truly agrees with setting up that fund. Honestly, no one answered, but the thick silence said it all. Brad, my cousin, shrugged and muttered. Better than sitting through another yearly speech about community consulting from a company no one's heard of. Might as well give real help instead of moral lectures. That was when I caught the look in Jessica's eyes, the only one in the room who'd ever stood up for me. She looked torn, like she wanted to stop this but knew it had gone too far. I nodded. Thank you, the fund sounds generous, but I'll have to decline. Olivia scoffed. You should think this through. You don't have anything left to prove. We get it. You're strong, but no need to keep suffering just for pride's sake. I smiled, a smile with no more tolerance behind it. Pride? No, Olivia. That's called dignity. And maybe it's finally time I show everyone here why I've never needed a single dollar from that pity fund. I walked back to my chair, pulled my brown leather bag onto the table, unzipped it, and took out a document folder, neatly organized, sealed in a leather binder. It wasn't time yet, but they had just chosen the quickest way to unmask themselves. I looked at each of them one by one and spoke in a voice as calm as if I were reading the weather report. Before we go any further with talk of dividing proceeds from the estate, maybe it's worth asking who actually owns the apartment complex three of you currently live in. No one spoke. No one laughed. I turned the first page. The company seal stood crisp and clear. Everlyn Holdings, LLC, legal owner of the Dawson residences. And I, Mary Whitmore, was the sole signatory on every document. I placed the stack of documents on the ebony table in the center of the room, the soft thud silencing every conversation. For the past 10 years, I've been seen as a burden, someone falling behind. Today, I think it's time we all reconsider our definition of value. I opened the file and pulled out a summary of personal assets. On the top, Elizabeth Trust Holdings under Whitmore Private Family Office. I handed copies to Uncle Paul and the rest of the table. Their eyes still carried traces of amusement. Until 15 seconds in, not a single smile remained. My current personal net worth after consolidating all real estate LLCs, investment funds, and reinvested profits since 2015 is $78 million. This includes 15 residential and commercial properties with steady cash flow, including the Dawson, where Ethan, Julia, and Olivia's family currently reside. Brad jumped up, nearly spilling his water glass. What? You own that building? No way. I nodded. Correct. Every renovation, every policy change, approved by me. For the past 3 years, every rent check has gone to the parent company, of which I hold 100% control. Julia's face lost all color. But you don't have the right. I cut her off, placing another document on the table. This is the ownership certificate for 35% of Whitmore Heritage Group, the family company that manages all assets, including Cedar Hollow. Uncle Paul froze. That can't be. Most shares belong to my side of the family. You only inherited 2% from June in the old will. True, but you all forgot about those smaller shareholders who quietly sold off their shares over the past 7 years. And I, through 3 independent investment firms, bought every single one. I laid out notarized documents confirming the transfers. Shares once owned by distant cousins who had cashed out to invest in crypto or real estate in Florida. I was the buyer. No one had noticed. No one had seen me as a threat. As of this morning, after merging all holdings under Elizabeth Trust Holdings, I own 35%, enough to veto any strategic decisions, including the sale of Cedar Hollow. Silence. No arguments. I turned to Uncle Paul, the same man who once told me I lacked financial literacy. You said I couldn't separate emotion from real value. But if a woman can quietly buy up 35% of a company without anyone noticing, then who really lacks understanding here? The room was still. The only sound was the ceiling fan humming above. Uncle Paul slumped back in his chair, There was no contempt in his eyes anymore, only confusion, and, for the first time, caution. Olivia tried to salvage control. Mary, listen, we could work together. Maybe a joint plan, redevelop Cedar Hollow into a luxury resort, split the profits. I shook my head. No. The estate will be preserved, exactly as Grandma June stated in the addendum to her will, currently held by my attorney. I'm converting it into a financial education and scholarship center for single mothers and financially lost youth, like I once was. Ethan slammed the table. His voice trembled with disbelief. What the hell are you doing with the family legacy? Charity? Not charity. Legacy. Carrying forward Grandma's real vision, not the so-called powerful bloodline you all like to chant about. Jessica stood then, clapping 3 slow times. Finally, someone who actually understood what June stood for. I turned to her, smiling. Thank you. I know, not everyone came here for money. Then I looked back at the rest of the table. If anyone wants to cash out or sell their shares, my lawyer can handle valuations and buyouts immediately. No need for further debates. I gathered my documents, carefully placed them back in my bag, and walked out of that conference room, without ever looking back. 2 months after I silenced that boardroom, the Cedar Hollow estate had transformed, not in architecture, but in meaning. Gone were the wine parties flaunting designer bags and glittering chandeliers. In their place, the grand hall where my grandmother once hung an antique map of Texas was now a space for teaching financial literacy to single mothers. The former tea lounge of the Whitmore ladies now held 12 laptops. Sponsored by me for introductory investment classes. I named the program June Foundation in honor of my grandmother, the only woman who ever taught me that money should carry responsibility, not ego. On opening day, Jessica was the first to arrive. She wore an ivory linen shirt, no expensive jewelry, but her eyes sparkled brighter than ever. You actually did what no one else in this family had the courage to even imagine, she said, placing a bouquet of lavender beside Grandma's portrait. She'd be so proud. I smiled, softly, but genuinely. I didn't do it for pride, I said. I did it because I owed her a promise. The attendees that day weren't the usual faces from family banquets. They were single moms, young women recovering from personal bankruptcies, people who had been denied loans because they didn't understand credit scores. They didn't know me as Mary Whitmore, the woman with a nearly $80 million real estate portfolio. They only knew me as the person helping them open their very first no-fee savings account. While I was explaining lease clauses to a small group, how to avoid predatory rental terms, my phone buzzed. A text from Brad. Mary, I heard you're transferring your shares to a charitable trust. Are you sure you want to give up that kind of control? I didn't respond right away. I let the message sit there, a living testament to the gap between us. They still didn't get it. I wasn't giving up control. I was transforming power into value. A week later, I signed the final directive. 51% of net profits from my active properties would now fund the Women's Economic Reentry and Education Trust under the June Foundation. The Dawson, once a symbol of the disregard I'd endured for years, would now donate 20% of its quarterly profits to rental subsidies for low-income workers. Julia, Olivia, and Ethan now knew who the true owner was, and none dared ask for family discounts anymore. They moved out quietly when their leases ended. I didn't stop them. For me, that chapter was closed. Uncle Paul called one late afternoon. His voice was rough. Mary, I want to say I'm sorry for everything I said in that meeting. You've proven yourself stronger than anyone in this family ever imagined. I was silent for a moment, then replied, I don't need an apology, Uncle Paul. I just hope that next time a child in our family strays from the approved path, you won't extinguish their fire so quickly. He choked out. Could I contribute to the foundation? I want to make up for some of my mistakes. I nodded, though he couldn't see it through the phone. The foundation welcomes all contributions, but you understand, no one can buy control here. I hung up, then stepped into the backyard, where Grandma's rose garden still bloomed. The April wind brushed my cheek, fragrant with fresh earth and petals. I placed my hand on the stone wall engraved with a brass plaque. Wealth isn't how much you have, it's what you do with what you have, June Whitmore. I read it again, silently. Then I smiled. I was no longer Mary, the different one. I was Mary, the one who protected our legacy, not with money, but with will. And finally, I understood. Wealth doesn't live in a bank account, it lives in how you make others feel like they matter. Mary's story is a powerful reminder that true wealth isn't about flashy displays. It's about building lasting value and using financial strength to lift others up. In real life, many quietly work in the shadows, overlooked for not showing off, yet they're the ones truly creating legacy. Recognition doesn't need to be begged for. It arrives the moment you stand up, live your values, and make meaningful change. What do you think about Mary's choice and how she redefined wealth? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more heartfelt stories about life and family. My name is Cora Whitman, 34 years old, living in the northern suburbs of Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm the communications director at a software development company. Work is hectic, life moves fast, but one thing has never changed. I am Ava's mother. I know, I didn't give birth to Ava. But every morning when she runs into my bedroom, hair tousled, brown eyes sparkling just because I'm still there, I know that motherhood doesn't need blood to be real. Ava came into my life like a sudden storm. 10 years ago, my cousin Becky, who was like a sister to me, gave birth to Ava at the age of 23. After her divorce, Becky raised Ava alone, and I was always around to help whenever I could. Then, tragedy struck. One snowy night, a truck hit Becky and her new boyfriend head-on Interstate 94. Ava, only 3 at the time, was home with the babysitter. I got the call at 3 a.m. Driving to the hospital, my hands shook so badly I could barely hold the wheel. The police said I was the only person legally eligible to be her guardian. Becky's mother had disappeared years ago, and her father was in prison for fraud. There was no one else. I was it. The adoption process took nearly 8 months to complete. During that time, I worked full-time while also taking Ava to preschool, therapy, regular checkups. I had to learn how to be a mom with no preparation. Fevers, nightmares, parent-teacher meetings where I was the only one who had no idea what to do. But, slowly, Ava began to hold my hand each night as she fell asleep. She no longer flinched at the sound of sirens. And I knew, no matter how unfair life had been, I hadn't let it break a 3-year-old's spirit. 3 years later, I met Jonah at a communications conference. He was the keynote speaker, tall, witty, and had a voice that could hush a full room. After his talk, he came down, shook my hand, and said, "I've never seen anyone take notes like you. You must be impossible to please." I smiled. "Maybe you'll try anyway." Jonah didn't have kids of his own, but from the first time he came to our home, he sat on the floor and built Lego castles with Ava for 2 hours. When she slipped and spilled juice, he didn't yell or frown. He just said, "Looks like the floor was thirsty." A year later, Jonah proposed. He knelt down, offered me a delicate sapphire ring, then turned to Ava and pulled out a heart-shaped necklace. "Would you let me be part of your family?" Ava nodded so hard she nearly cried. I had never seen a child's eyes glow like that. We had our wedding that September, on a warm afternoon by Lake Minnetonka. Jonah didn't just say vows to me. He said them to Ava, in front of everyone. Not long after, he finalized the legal adoption. Just like that, we became a family of 3. Simple, but complete. I thought everything would be peaceful from then on. I truly believed that. Until the day I came home earlier than planned, opened the front door, and saw Ava, my little girl, the one I had held through countless sleepless nights, kneeling alone, scrubbing the kitchen floor. No one else was home, not a single soul. I stood, frozen. I still remember the first evening I brought Ava to my in-laws' house, Martin and Cheryl Whitman. They lived in the suburbs of Stillwater, in a vintage-style home with a white picket fence and wisteria vines curling around the front porch. Cheryl opened the door with a tight smile, lips pressed together like they weren't used to stretching. She looked at me, then down at Ava, who was clinging tightly to my hand, and said softly, "Oh, is this your stepdaughter?" I didn't like the word step, but I smiled and replied, "This is Ava, my daughter. She officially carries the Whitman name." Jonah gave my hand a gentle squeeze. I knew he felt it too. That thin, unmistakable tension, being judged without a single word spoken. Family gatherings afterward only made it clearer. Every Thanksgiving, Christmas, or Jonah's birthday, the family would gather in full. His older brother Elliot and his wife Meredith always brought their daughter Clara, who was 9, just a little older than Ava. The two girls got along fine, but the difference in how the adults treated them was impossible to ignore. Clara was always the favorite, the head seat at the table, the bunny-themed plate, the custom cake with her name in chocolate. Meanwhile, Ava received a small box without wrapping paper. Last year, Clara was gifted an electronic game worth hundreds of dollars. Ava unwrapped a thin children's book, missing pages. I was ready to speak up, but Jonah gently shook his head, giving me a look across the table, silently pleading, "Not now." I didn't make a scene, but I remembered. One time, on the way home, Ava asked me, "Mom, why did I only get a bookmark and Clara got an Elsa doll?" I swallowed hard. "Maybe Grandma and Grandpa thought you'd like the book more. You do like books, right?" Ava nodded slightly, but her little eyes didn't hide the sadness. She understood, and I hated that moment, when a child begins to accept being left out as something normal. Last summer, Jonah agreed to take the family to his childhood farm, where he and Elliot had grown up. It was Cheryl's idea, saying she wanted the grandkids to connect with nature, learn to camp and garden. I agreed, though a part of me hesitated. The trip lasted 3 days, but after half a day I already wanted to pack up and leave. As soon as we arrived, Clara was swept up into Martin's arms. He spun her around in a field of lavender, laughing thunderously. Ava stood next to me, holding her backpack with one hand, clutching my sleeve with the other. No one picked her up. No one said, "Look how big you've gotten." But the worst part came at dinner. Cheryl served her homemade peach cobbler, exactly 6 slices. Clara got the biggest one. Ava got none. "Too much sugar isn't good if you haven't finished your veggies," Cheryl said without lifting her eyes from her napkin. Ava said nothing, but she didn't touch her plate for the rest of the meal. Jonah finally spoke up. "Mom, if Clara gets dessert, so does Ava." Clara finished her food. Ava didn't. "Ava is also your granddaughter," Jonah said firmly, cutting her off. No one responded. The silence was heavier than stone. That night, Jonah and I lay in silence in the wooden guest room. He didn't speak, just sighed deeply. I couldn't hold it in. "I know you don't want to confront them, but if you let this continue, Ava will grow up thinking she deserves to be treated like this. Is that what you want?" Jonah turned toward me. For the first time, I saw a genuine inner conflict in his eyes. "You're right. I'll talk to them tomorrow." But I didn't wait until tomorrow, because when I woke up early the next morning, Ava wasn't in bed. I ran outside. Through the morning mist, I saw her pulling weeds along the fence, her tiny hands covered in dirt, cheeks flushed from the sun. Cheryl stood nearby, arms crossed, barking. "If you want to be here, you need to work like a good little granddaughter." I couldn't breathe. My ears rang. I walked forward, barely keeping calm. "Ava, get inside, now." Cheryl turned, startled when she saw me. She gave a dry laugh. "I'm just teaching her responsibility. She needs to understand her place." I looked straight into her eyes, my voice colder than the June morning breeze. "My daughter doesn't need lessons from someone who doesn't know how to be a grandmother." For the first time, Cheryl was speechless. In early March, my company held a national strategy conference in Dallas. I was planning to opt out. But unfortunately, our biggest project of the quarter, a campaign in partnership with a nationwide retail chain, was selected as the central topic. My boss called me into his office, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "Cora, you're the lead. If you're not there, we lose the deal." I couldn't say I'm a mom to step back from the responsibility. No matter what else I was, I still had to ensure the work ran smoothly. Jonah hugged me from behind in the kitchen as I flipped through the calendar. Go ahead. I've got Ava. I turned to look at him, lips slightly pressed. Are you sure? I'll be gone for 4 days. School schedule, homework, dance class, that speech she's preparing for the school contest. I've got it. You forget I used to manage a 10-person team? I chuckled, not out of amusement, but exhaustion. But before I could breathe a sigh of relief, 2 days before the trip, Jonah got an emergency call from work. The Phoenix office reported a customer data crisis, and they needed a senior manager on site for an audit. I'll only be gone 2 days. I'll be back Sunday night. You can handle the last 2 days, right? I said nothing. Ava's sitter was away on a long-distance internship. Our closest neighbor had just moved. My mom was in Vermont, recovering from eye surgery, and couldn't fly. Jonah spoke up, like he'd just thought of something. What about my parents? Cheryl's always said she wanted more time with Ava. Maybe this is a good chance. I stood still. Reflexively, I shook my head. No, I don't want her alone with them. Jonah didn't blame me. He knew why. But every option was a dead end. After much hesitation, I reluctantly agreed. On one condition. Only for the first 2 days. The moment you're back, you pick Ava up. No exceptions. Friday morning, Cheryl and Martin came to pick up Ava at our house. I still remember the feeling in my stomach. Low and constant, like my gut was trying to warn me something was about to go wrong. We're taking her to White Pine Lake. No cell signal, but peaceful, fresh air. It'll be good for her. I knelt and hugged Ava. She wore the sea green sweater I had just knit last week, her small shoulders trembling slightly. I'll call. Answer when you get signal, okay? Okay? I'll bring my journal. If I can't call, I'll write so you can read later. She hugged me tight, longer than usual. The Dallas conference was more crowded, louder, and more suffocating than I expected. But I still called Ava every night. The first night, the signal was weak. I barely heard her tiny voice. Today I helped Grandma pick asparagus. She said, lazy kids don't deserve dessert after dinner. I pressed for more, but Ava simply whispered, It's okay, Mom, I'm fine. The second night, I called 3 times. No one picked up. My texts weren't read. I started to feel anxious. Jonah messaged me saying on my way home, but his flight was delayed due to a sandstorm. I felt like I was locked in a fancy conference room while my insides burned hour by hour. On the third night, around 7 p.m., I was having dinner with clients when my phone buzzed. A text from Jonah. I'm home. Cheryl said Ava was already asleep, so they let her stay 1 more night. They said they'll bring her back tomorrow. I immediately dropped my fork, stepped away from the table, and called Cheryl. She picked up after 12 rings. Oh, Cora, I didn't know you were calling. Signal's terrible here. Where's Ava? Sleeping. She didn't eat well today. Made a mess in the room, so I had her mop the floor for a bit, teach her a lesson. My throat tightened. My heart pounded like a hammer. You made an 8-year-old mop the floor as punishment? The girl needs discipline. You've been spoiling her way too much. I stood up from the table, ignoring the stares around me. I spoke through gritted teeth into the phone. I'm coming back, and you will never, ever be alone with my daughter again. Ever. The next morning, I caught the earliest flight and rushed straight to Cheryl and Martin's house. But when I got there, the front yard was silent. No kids, no voices, no one home. I called and called. No answer. I walked around back. And that's when I saw Ava. Sitting on the wooden steps, hugging her knees, hair messy, pants dirty, face flushed like she was close to a fever. When she looked up at me, for the first time, there was no light left in her eyes. I drove like I'd lost control, racing from Cheryl's backyard back into the city. Ava sat in the passenger seat, curled up in Jonah's old hoodie I kept in the trunk. For nearly an hour, she said nothing, just hugged her knees and stared straight ahead. Her eyes were swollen, hands trembling, and a small scratch on her chin stood out starkly against her pale skin. I tried not to grip the steering wheel too tightly, but my wrists already ached. ached with anger, ached with guilt, and worst of all, because Ava hadn't shed a single tear. When we got home, I carried her into the bathroom, turned on the warm water, and gently took off her shoes and socks. "What happened to your foot?" Ava pulled back slightly as I noticed a long red mark stretching from her ankle to the top of her foot. Grandma made me scrub the stone walkway. I had to use a wire brush. I froze. "Did Clara do it with you?" Ava shook her head. "Clara went skateboarding. Grandpa took her and bought her ice cream, too. Grandma said I didn't deserve any." I bit my lip so hard I tasted blood, but I kept asking. Why did she say that? Ava lowered her eyes, her thin little hands clutching the towel. She said, "Because I'm not her real granddaughter." It felt like someone was slicing into my heart, one stroke at a time. Did she say anything else? Ava nodded, then whispered like she was scared I couldn't bear it. She said, "You only adopted me out of pity, that if it weren't for you, I'd be in an orphanage, and because of that, I should know my place." A surge of something raw and primal rose in me. Shock, pain, fury, unlike anything I'd ever felt. I pulled her close, rested my forehead on her damp hair. "Listen to me, Ava. Every word. I never pitied you. I chose you. I chose to be your mother. No one forced me. Not out of duty, not out of guilt, but out of love." Ava let out a tiny gasp and finally cried. I held her until the bathwater turned cold. That night, I called Jonah. His voice was hoarse on the other end of the line. "I just got home. They told me you took Ava without asking. That you're overreacting." I held my breath. I found her sitting alone in the backyard, cold, hungry, scratched up, and silent like a ghost. And where were they? Jonah was quiet for a moment. "Do you have any proof?" His question hit like a slap. I didn't need proof. I had Ava. I have her scraped legs, her blistered hands from cleaning chemicals. I have the journal entry she wrote last night where she said they locked her in a room for 3 hours because she lied. Jonah sighed. "I need to see it for myself." I didn't argue. I just sent him everything I had, photos, recordings, and a clip I filmed of Cheryl telling me that girl needs to be retrained if she wants to live in a decent home. The next morning, Jonah came home early. Ava was still sleeping. I opened my laptop and showed him the evidence. He watched once, then again. He said nothing. Finally, he stood, walked into our daughter's room. I followed, stopping at the doorway. He sat by her bed, watching the little girl curled up around her teddy bear. "Ava?" She opened her eyes. The moment she saw Jonah, she flinched. That broke him instantly. You're not mad at me, are you?" Ava whispered. Jonah cried. No sobbing, no shaking, just silent tears falling onto her pillow. "I'm sorry, I didn't know. I was wrong to trust them." And I knew he understood that sometimes blood is the sharpest blade. We decided not to let this go. Jonah emailed Cheryl and Martin, stating they were not allowed near Ava unless both of us were present. At the same time, we contacted a family lawyer to explore legal protections. That night, Ava placed her hand on my chest and asked, "Mommy, am I really a part of our family?" I held her hand and pressed it against my heart. "You're not just a part, you are the center of it. Anyone who can't see that doesn't belong in this family." And for the first time, I saw a tiny light flicker in her eyes. That night, after all the anger had settled and Ava had been bathed, fed chicken porridge, and tucked in with her worn-out teddy bear named Buttercup, I sat at the edge of her bed, trying to keep my voice calm. "Ava, I want you to tell me everything, not just what happened this morning. I want to know what the past few days were like. While I was away, what happened?" She looked at me, hesitation flickering in her eyes, as if deciding whether or not to open up. After a long pause, Ava nodded. Her voice was so faint, I had to lean in to hear her. On the first day, Grandma told me, "Don't make a mess like those undisciplined kids." I had only taken out some colored paper to fold boats. She made me clean it all up, then didn't let me have dessert. I gently squeezed her hand but didn't interrupt. The next day, Clara wanted to go to the water park. Grandpa said only Clara could go because good girls get rewards. I had to stay. Grandma gave me a stack of towels and told me to wipe down all the kitchen chairs. I froze. While Clara got to have fun, my 8-year-old daughter was made to do housework like an unpaid maid. Did you say anything? I asked, "Why can't I go?" Grandma said, "Because you're not a real Whitman. Girls in this family don't whine." She also said if I was upset, I could sit alone and reflect on my place. Ava's voice trembled when she said those words, my place. A child shouldn't know concepts like that, but Ava did, all too well. That night I slept alone. Clara got to sleep with Grandma. They locked my door. I got up from the bed and paced the room like I needed to escape my own body. Every word felt like a shard of glass slicing into me. What about the third day? Ava looked down. I spilled a glass of orange juice while carrying it outside. Grandma didn't let me come back in, she said. "If you can't hold your hand steady, then stand outside and learn to appreciate." It was cold. "Mommy, I was really shivering," she cried, quietly, not with sobs, but the kind of stifled tears taught to children who've been told crying is being dramatic. I pulled her into my arms. She tucked into my shoulder and whispered, "Do you think I'm a burden?" It felt like a punch to the chest. "No, Ava. You are a gift. The best thing that's ever happened to me. Anyone who says otherwise doesn't deserve to hear your voice, doesn't deserve to step into this home." The next morning, I printed every page of Ava's journal from the past 3 days. Some words were shaky, others smudged with tears. I kept them as evidence. Jonah sat at the kitchen table, hands clenched, face pale like the blood had drained from it. My parents did all this? To her? Do you think she made it up? No, I just can't believe it. I slid the papers toward him. Believing isn't the point anymore. What matters is what we do next to protect her. Jonah nodded, voice hoarse. "I'll call them. Today." But before Jonah could make that call, Cheryl showed up. She knocked on our door that afternoon, holding a bag of cookies and wearing a fake smile, like nothing had happened. I opened the door, but didn't invite her in. Ava saw her and immediately hid behind the sofa. "Cora, I think we need to talk. Seems like you've misunderstood something." I blocked the doorway, strangely calm. "You starved, locked up, and humiliated my daughter. You told her she wasn't family. Do you remember that?" Cheryl's face drained of color. "You're overreacting. That was discipline. You've spoiled her too much." I tilted my head, speaking slowly. "I don't need to teach my daughter how to endure pain just to be accepted in a family. I teach her to know her worth. And that worth doesn't come from anyone's bloodline." Cheryl gripped her cookie bag tightly. "You think you can keep me from seeing my granddaughter?" "She's not your granddaughter, she's my daughter. And yes, I can. I will. And if necessary, I'll take it to court." For the first time, Cheryl stepped back. She said nothing else, just turned away, heels clicking against the sidewalk like she was walking out of a courtroom she'd just lost. I shut the door. Ava was still hiding behind the sofa, eyes wide. I crouched down and held out my hand. "You don't have to hide anymore. This is your home. And I've protected it." We didn't wait long. The next evening, Jonah called his parents and invited them over to clear things up. Not to argue, not to hear excuses, but to draw the line. We prepared carefully. Ava was sent to her best friend's house down the street, where she could play in peace and be spared from hearing anything that might hurt her again. I printed a note outlining everything that had happened. Dates, words, specific actions. Not to debate, but to make sure no one could pretend to forget. Cheryl and Martin arrived at 6 p.m. She wore a deep red sweater and more makeup than usual. He trailed behind, hands in his coat pockets, avoiding eye contact. I opened the door. No tea offered, no kitchen pleasantries, no small talk. We sat in the living room. Jonah spoke first, his voice low and firm. Mom, Dad, we're not here tonight to reconcile. We're here to set boundaries. Cheryl frowned. Boundaries? What's so serious? Jonah, is Cora putting you up to this? I stayed calm. If you still have a shred of respect for me, don't talk like that. This isn't about me. It's about Ava. Jonah nodded. What you did to her is unacceptable. Neglect, favoritism, emotional abuse. It crossed every line any adult should have with a child, especially within a family. Martin sighed. Jonah, you're overreacting. Kids make things up to get sympathy. She's not your blood. How could... Jonah cut in immediately. That's exactly the issue. Ava is our daughter, not a stepchild, not a foster kid. She's a full member of this family, and anyone who can't accept that has no place in her life. Cheryl let out a laugh, but it was ice cold. So what now? We're supposed to bow down and apologize to a stray off the street? My knuckles whitened from clenching my fists. No, you don't need to apologize to Ava, because apologies require genuine remorse. But from now on, you and Martin will not be allowed alone with her. Every visit will be supervised, no exceptions. If you violate this, we will cut all contact. Martin leaned forward. You're tearing this family apart over a little misunderstanding? Jonah stared directly at him, unblinking. Not a little. This has been building for 3 years, and it all exploded over 3 days. Ava learned to stay silent because she was afraid of being blamed. She believed she wasn't worthy of love. That's not a misunderstanding. That's harm. Cheryl stood up suddenly. I raised 2 sons. No one gets to say, I'm a bad grandmother. I replied coldly. You can believe what you want, but Ava's feelings are what matter, and you failed her. Martin remained quiet, eyes on the floor. Jonah turned to his mother one last time. If you truly want to remain part of Ava's life, it starts with respecting her as a regular child, not a real grandchild or a lesser one. And that means no unsupervised visits, no discipline your way, no repeated insults. From now on, we decide. Cheryl shook her head and stormed out. I won't stand here and be insulted by my own son. You want war? Fine. Just wait. The door slammed behind them. We didn't speak for a long while. Jonah rested his head on his hand, exhaling like he'd lifted a boulder off his chest. You did great, Cora. I didn't feel proud, I just felt hollow. We didn't do great, Jonah. We only did what was right, and later than she deserved. Late that night, I peeked into Ava's room. She was hugging Buttercup, her face peaceful in sleep. I sat beside her bed and whispered, Everything will be different from now on, my love, I promise. And for the first time in many nights, I didn't dream of her being left behind. 2 days after the tense confrontation with Cheryl and Martin, our home phone wouldn't stop ringing. It wasn't them, it was Jonah's extended family. His cousin was the first to call, her voice half accusatory, half angry. Cora, what is going on? Cheryl just called me, crying like I've never heard before. She said you're trying to tear the family apart, making things up about Ava and blowing it out of proportion. I held the phone, paused a few seconds, then answered calmly. I don't have to make anything up. Everything is true, and I have proof. But she's not really their blood, Cora. You have to understand what a grandmother feels. I let out a cold laugh. A real grandmother wouldn't leave an 8-year-old out in the cold and call her undeserving. If that's the behavior you're defending, then I have nothing more to say. She hung up right after, but the phone kept ringing. Cousins, longtime family friends, even an elderly aunt from Seattle who's never met Ava called just to let Cora know she's hurting the people who raised Jonah. Jonah noticed I was holding back tears. He took the phone from me and began answering each call himself. No, my mother is not the victim. Ava is the one who's been hurt. And if you don't believe it, come see the photos, journal entries, and her own words. The silence that followed lasted longer than I expected. Maybe Jonah's firmness made them hesitant, but the most surprising response came from Liam, Jonah's youngest brother. Liam is a quiet type, lives in Colorado, and usually only shows up during the holidays. His daughter Clara is the same age as Ava. The two girls used to play together during family gatherings. That afternoon, Liam video called Jonah, and I was there when he answered. "Hey guys. Jonah, I talked to Mom and Dad. I don't know what to say, but after hearing it, I feel..." Jonah nodded silently. Liam continued. "Claire told me Ava wasn't allowed cake, was made to clean the yard, and got yelled at by Grandma. At first, I thought she was making it up, but then..." Her voice was trembling. I leaned toward the screen. "Is Clara okay?" "She's fine, but she keeps asking, did that happen to Ava because she's adopted?" Liam sighed. "You get it, both girls are being affected, and I can't defend Mom on this." For the first time in the middle of all this chaos, I cried. But this time, it was because someone was standing up for my daughter. "Thank you, Liam. I want to help. I'll speak to them directly, and if needed, I'll confirm everything Clara said. She's not lying." That night, Liam posted on his personal Facebook page. No names, no locations, but clear enough for the entire family to know who he meant. Blood does not define how a child should be treated. If you, as an adult, choose to treat two kids differently because only one shares your blood, the problem isn't with the child. It's with you. I stand with kindness, not toxic tradition. The post was shared hundreds of times within hours. People who'd stayed silent began calling back, but this time to apologize. Some messaged me privately, saying they had no idea how serious it was. Others admitted they'd noticed Cheryl favoring Clara too much, but had been too afraid to speak up. I wasn't looking for validation, but I knew. On my own, I could shout forever and still be unheard. Yet with Jonah and Liam standing beside our girl, the truth had no choice but to be heard. The next day, Cheryl sent an email. Just one line. "If you've convinced the whole family to side with you, then you've won. But don't expect me to kneel." I didn't respond, because deep down I knew this wasn't a victory. This was only the beginning of reclaiming dignity for a child hurt by those who were supposed to love her unconditionally. 2 weeks after everything exploded, I took Ava to see a child psychologist. Dr. Rachel Brenner's office sat on the second floor of a red brick building near Centennial Park. The room was bright, with a large window, soft couches, and shelves full of comic books and stuffed animals of every kind. At first, Ava was silent, barely speaking. She sat hugging Buttercup, eyes fixed on the window. But Dr. Brenner didn't rush her. She didn't pry. She sat with Ava, worked on puzzles, then gently introduced a modern fairy tale about a brave little girl who didn't need a crown to know she was worthy. Gradually, Ava began to open up. She said she used to believe she was just a guest in our home, that if she made a mistake, I'd change my mind and send her back, like returning a broken item. My chest tightened. "Who told you that?" No one said it outright, but Grandma used to say, "You're lucky Cora's a kind woman." So I thought, if you stopped being kind, then... I squeezed her hand, but Dr. Brenner gently interjected. "Ava, your mom doesn't love you out of kindness. She loves you because you are you, and you deserve to be loved like that. No proof needed, no conditions." Ava stayed quiet for a moment, then nodded. The following therapy sessions were regular. Sometimes Ava talked, sometimes she just drew. But every drawing, every scribbled sentence on sketch paper, was a window into a young soul that had been abandoned too early. Jonah and I joined some private sessions as well. We learned how to listen without interrupting, how to respond without invalidating her feelings. We learned how to apologize, even when we didn't think we were wrong. Because sometimes a child doesn't need a justification. They need their pain acknowledged. Jonah changed the most. He became more intentional, no longer hesitating to say, my daughter, in public. He was the one who suggested they create a new family album, printing pictures from the first day I adopted her, school festivals, birthdays, and even that first clumsy attempt at skiing. We're doing this so Ava knows she's always been part of this, not just in our house, but in our memories. One evening after therapy, Ava sat down at the kitchen table, grabbed her markers, and drew a small house. On the roof, in messy handwriting, she wrote, "This is my real home. No one can take it." I choked up. 6 months later, Ava had a school presentation titled, My Family. I braced myself for a short, awkward speech, but when she stepped up to the front, holding a drawing of Buttercup, 2 adults holding an umbrella and a girl smiling beneath it, I knew something had shifted. My family isn't like everyone else's. I don't live with my birth parents, but I live with people who choose to love me every day, even when I'm grumpy, messy, or afraid to sleep alone. The room was silent. My family doesn't share DNA, but we share a heart. I sat in the back row, gripping the edge of the chair, holding back tears. Jonah didn't even try. 1 tear ran down his cheek. On the drive home, Ava turned to me and asked, "Mom, can I call him Dad now, not Jonah anymore?" I looked at her, and in that moment, no word could describe the joy inside me. Jonah, the man who once froze in silence when his parents insulted her, now sat beside me, his eyes red. "Only if that's what you really want, Ava." She nodded and leaned her head on his shoulder. We didn't cut Cheryl and Martin off entirely, but every interaction was monitored, brief, and with clear boundaries. Cheryl tried to reconnect, bringing gifts and a forced smile. Ava accepted the gift, thanked her, then returned to playing with Clara, keeping her distance. There was no bitterness in her eyes, only a quiet maturity I had never seen in an 8-year-old. I used to think I needed to protect Ava from the world outside, but now I know some battles begin within the walls we assume are safest. And through it all, I've learned this. Family isn't where you're born. It's where you're chosen, where you're heard, and where love is given, without conditions. Ava is my daughter. No blood required, only heart. Cora and Ava's story is proof that love doesn't require blood to be sacred. In a society still weighed down by blood ties bias, their journey reminds us that real family is built through choice, commitment, and showing up for one another. Every single day. Sometimes to protect a child, we must draw lines, even with those closest to us. And in that brave moment of standing up, love becomes its fullest, most powerful form. What do you think of Cora's choice? Would you do the same to protect your child? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to follow the channel for more moving, meaningful stories about family and life.
I will never forget that day, the day my life shattered, even though I was too young to fully understand it. I sat on the worn-out couch in the living room, clutching my tattered teddy bear, its ear frayed from years of love. In front of me, my parents sat across from each other, their gazes distant and cold. There were no shouts, no broken furniture, just eerily calm words. Words that decided my fate. "Hannah, sweetheart, your father and I can't live together anymore." That sentence, gentle yet cruel, pierced my mind like a cold needle. I didn't cry. Maybe because I couldn't grasp its full meaning, or maybe because I had sensed this distance long before. My parents divided everything as neatly as pieces on a chessboard. Mom kept the house, Dad moved into a new apartment, and I was split between them, 1 week with Mom, 1 week with Dad. A plan that seemed fair but made me feel like an object being passed back and forth. Just a year later, my father remarried. Elizabeth entered my life like a soft breeze, neither intrusive nor forced, just quietly present. I still remember the first time I met her, at a small diner near my school. A woman with deep blue eyes and a gentle smile, so different from the women my father had dated before. "Hi, Hannah, your dad has told me so much about you," she said, her voice warm and sincere. Beside her was Ethan, a boy 3 years younger than me, playing with his fries and grinning mischievously. "Do you want to be my big sister?" he asked, looking up at me with bright, eager eyes. I had never had a sibling before, and for the first time, the idea of having a younger brother didn't seem so bad. Not long after, my dad and Elizabeth got married. But unlike my parents' broken marriage, this wedding felt warmer. It wasn't just a promise between the two of them, it was a promise to us. Today, we're not just becoming husband and wife, my dad said, his voice thick with emotion as he looked at Ethan and me. We're becoming a family. Elizabeth reached for my hand, her eyes kind. Thank you for letting me be a part of your life. I didn't know if I believed her words, but for the first time in a year filled with turmoil, I felt like I had something steady to hold on to. Things could have been better if my mother had felt the same way. It didn't take long for my mom to remarry either. Richard entered my life, with his confident stride, deep voice and perfect smile. But unlike Elizabeth, his presence didn't bring comfort. My mother beamed whenever she was with him, but I noticed something strange. Her eyes no longer looked at me the same way. It became even clearer when she delivered the news that left me frozen in place. Hannah, you're going to have a little sister. The house suddenly felt smaller than ever. Everything revolved around the unborn baby. My mother, who had once given me at least some attention, barely even saw me anymore. Richard, whom I had tried to be respectful toward, began showing his true colors. To him, I was just an extra piece in this family, a misfit. Then Sophia was born. A tiny, fragile baby, who instantly became the center of everything. I watched my mother hold her, her eyes glowing in a way I had never seen when she looked at me. Richard stood beside her, beaming with pride, as if he had just received the greatest treasure. I stood there, feeling like an outsider, silently watching a picture-perfect family that I didn't belong to. When my dad and Elizabeth took me home that night, I sat in silence the entire ride. "You okay, Hannah?" Elizabeth asked, her voice filled with concern. I stared out the window, watching the streetlights blur past, like memories slipping away. "I'm fine," I answered. But even I didn't believe my own words. I was only 10, but I had already learned one painful truth. Not everyone who brings you into this world sees you as family. Everything changed completely after Sophia was born. At first I told myself it was just a phase. A newborn needed more care. My mom was exhausted. I just had to be patient. But as the days stretched into weeks, and the weeks into months, I realized I had become invisible in my own home. My mother's entire world revolved around Sophia. Every conversation was about the baby, as if nothing else mattered. If I tried to talk to her, I was met with a distracted wave of her hand, a half-hearted response or, more often than not, complete silence. Richard had never acknowledged me as part of his family, and now that Sophia was here, he had the perfect excuse to ignore me altogether. The first time I truly felt it was on my 11th birthday. I woke up excited, hoping for a simple happy birthday, maybe a cake, or at least a hug from my mother. But when I walked into the kitchen, all I saw was her bustling around, preparing breakfast for Sophia while Richard sat at the table, flipping through the newspaper and sipping his coffee, as if I didn't exist. I stood there, waiting. "Mom," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. She turned around, frowning slightly. "What is it, Hannah?" I swallowed hard, gripping the hem of my shirt. "Today is my birthday." A flicker of confusion crossed my mother's eyes, then disappeared just as quickly. "Oh, I forgot. I'm sorry, but Sophia isn't feeling well today, and I can't deal with that right now. We'll do something this weekend, okay?" But that weekend never came. No cake, no candles, no small party, not even a present. And the worst part wasn't the forgetting. It was the fact that my mother didn't even care. A bitter feeling crept into my chest as I realized one thing. To them, I was just an extra. After that day, I started spending more time at my dad's house. No one noticed where I went, no one asked me about school, no one cared whether I came home for dinner or not. If I wasn't at the dinner table, my mother simply assumed I was somewhere else, and Richard never bothered to ask. In contrast, things were completely different at my dad's house. Elizabeth always remembered my favorite foods. Ethan excitedly showed me his new games. My dad always took the time to ask about school, my friends, and the things I liked. Every little thing seemed to matter to them. I spent my 12th birthday at my dad's house. A small cake, a few simple gifts, but in that moment, I felt more love than ever. No one forgot me. No one treated me like a shadow. Then one day, my dad called me into his office. "Hannah, have you ever thought about moving here permanently?" he asked, his voice careful but hopeful. I froze. I had thought about it. I had no reason to stay at my mother's house anymore, but I hesitated, not because of any emotional attachment, but because I knew how she would react. My dad sighed, as if he could read my mind. "I already called your mother. I told her you'd be living here, full time." My eyes widened. She agreed. He was quiet for a moment before answering. "Not exactly, but when I told her I would stop the child support payments, she didn't object." A cold feeling spread through my chest. My mother hadn't tried to keep me. No tears, no anger, no pleading. She only cared about the money. That night, when I went back to pack my things, my mother stood in my doorway, arms crossed. "I think you should reconsider," she said, her voice dry. I looked at her, feeling strangely empty. "Why?" She hesitated for a moment, then spoke plainly. "Do you have any idea how expensive it is to raise a child? Richard and I have done our best, but if you move out, your father's child support will stop. That would affect this family a lot." "This family?" I let out a quiet, bitter laugh, pain and relief swelling inside me at the same time. "So, you're not upset about me leaving, you're just worried about losing money?" She opened her mouth as if to argue, but said nothing. Because we both knew the truth. I pulled my suitcase out of the room, brushing past her. No tears. No last words. As I left, Sophia slept soundly on the couch, and Richard didn't even look up from his phone. No one really cared. But that was the last time I let it hurt me, because for the first time I walked out of that house, not as a child abandoned, but as someone who had chosen her own path. In the years that followed, I rarely went back to my mother's house. At first, I tried to stay in touch, but every visit made me feel like an uninvited guest. My mother never called me first, never asked about school, my friends, or anything about my life. Richard didn't even bother pretending to care, and Sophia, the sister I never truly had, seemed to enjoy reminding me that I didn't belong there. "Hannah, you're just a guest here, aren't you?" the 13-year-old girl said quietly, a smirk playing on her lips as I stood in the kitchen pouring myself a glass of water. "Dad said you're just visiting, not really part of this family." I used to ignore those words. But as Sophia grew older, she became bolder. One Thanksgiving, I stopped by my mother's house at her invitation, though it felt more like a polite obligation. As soon as I stepped inside, Sophia sat in an armchair, scrolling through her phone, not even bothering to look up. "Oh, you're here," she said flatly, then let out a small chuckle. "Thought you'd forgotten about this house." My mother and Richard didn't greet me as a family member either. They were too busy preparing dinner, laughing and chatting as if I weren't even there. That atmosphere told me everything I needed to know. They had cut me out of their lives long ago. The year I turned 18, I graduated from high school. While my dad and Elizabeth sat beaming in the audience, proud as they watched me receive my diploma, my mother barely seemed to care. When the ceremony ended, she only asked me one thing. "When are you moving out?" Not congratulations. Not, "I'm proud of you." Just a simple, "When are you leaving?" I didn't answer right away. I stared at her for a long moment, searching for even the slightest trace of regret in her eyes, but there was none. Just anticipation. Not for my future, but for the day she no longer had to be responsible for me. Richard stood beside her, arms crossed, throwing me a look as if I were an obstacle in their plans. Sophia, now 15, just smirked. They had never wanted me there. and now they had a perfect excuse to push me out. I took a deep breath and said just one word. Next week. My mother nodded, as if that was the answer she had been waiting for. When I packed my things, no one helped me. My dad and Elizabeth were waiting at home, and there was nothing left for me here. I stuffed the last remnants of my childhood into an old suitcase, and took one final look around my room. There were no photos of me on the walls, no signs that I had ever grown up in this house. I dragged my suitcase to the door, but just as I reached for the handle, Sophia's voice rang out behind me. You know, you'll never really have a family. I turned, looking at the little sister I had never truly been close to. You know what? I let out a small, cold laugh. I already do. I opened the door, stepped outside, and never looked back. The next day, I sat in my dad's living room, a wave of relief washing over me. Hannah, have you thought about college? My dad asked, sliding an envelope toward me. I opened it, my heart stopping for a moment as I saw the amount inside. A savings fund that he and Elizabeth had been putting aside for me for years. We always wanted you to have the best start possible, Elizabeth smiled, gently holding my hand. We've been planning this for a long time. Unlike my mother, these people actually cared about my future. I smiled. For the first time in my life, I knew exactly where I belonged. I entered college with one goal: to never depend on anyone but myself. My dad and Elizabeth had saved up a college fund for me, but I didn't want to rely on it entirely. I wanted to earn my own money, to build my life, dollar by dollar. So, in my very first year, I found a part-time job at a coffee shop on campus. Every morning I woke up at 5 a.m. to brew coffee for a long line of sleep-deprived students, then rushed straight to class, only to return for another shift in the evening. No parties, no luxury vacations. Just assignments, work, and sleepless nights trying to keep up with my coursework. I didn't complain. I didn't have time to complain. 4 years passed in a whirlwind. I graduated with a finance degree and an impressive track record that caught the attention of major companies. But instead of blindly applying for jobs, I decided to consider a special offer from Elizabeth. My brother, Mark, is looking for a new financial analyst, she said as we sat together for dinner. I can introduce you, but remember, you'll have to prove yourself. No one gets special treatment there. I had known Mark before. He was a straightforward, serious man who didn't believe in family favors when it came to business. But that was exactly what I needed. I didn't want a job handed to me. I wanted to earn it. The interview was more intense than I had expected. Mark sat across from me in the conference room, flipping through my resume with sharp, calculating eyes. Hannah, I'll be blunt. Your academic record is strong, but I don't hire employees based on grades alone. I kept my composure, sitting up straight. I don't expect any special treatment. I just want a chance to prove that I can bring value to this company. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. All right. You have a 2-month probation period. If you perform well, you'll stay. I seized that opportunity with everything I had. I threw myself into my work as if it were the only thing that mattered. I took on the toughest projects, worked overtime without being asked, and studied every financial report until my vision blurred. My colleagues had more experience, were sharper in some ways, but I had something they didn't: a relentless hunger to succeed. And then, results began to show. 6 months in, Mark called me into his office. He crossed his arms, eyeing me as if assessing a rough diamond that had just been polished. You've exceeded my expectations, he said, his voice steady but with a hint of satisfaction. I'm keeping you on. I clenched my fists under the table, suppressing a smile. This wasn't just a job. This was the first step toward building a future on my terms. 3 years later, I was no longer the new hire. I had become one of the company's top financial analysts, the kind of employee Mark trusted with major projects. My salary grew steadily, and I knew exactly what to do with it. I saved. Not for designer clothes, not for extravagant vacations. Every dollar went into investments, real estate research, and mortgage planning. I wanted a home of my own. Not a temporary apartment. Not a place where I had to worry about being kicked out. A home where I held the only key. A place that no one could take away from me. I had spent nearly 25 years without a place that truly belonged to me. Now I was about to have it. I just didn't know that the very people who had cast me aside would come back. This time, wanting a share of what I had built. I never expected that after all these years of silence, my mother would suddenly reach out to me. The message came on a late afternoon while I was at the office, organizing documents for an important meeting. My phone screen lit up with a name I never expected to see. "Hannah, it's Mom, I miss you so much. Come home for dinner. The whole family is looking forward to seeing you." I stared at the words on my screen. The whole family? What family? The one that discarded me when I was just a child? I had grown used to my mother's absence in my life. She never called during my college years. She didn't check in when I graduated. She didn't care when I started my career. And now, suddenly, she missed me? I didn't respond right away. But curiosity won over logic. A part of me wanted to know what they wanted. And it didn't take me long to find out. That night, I drove to the old house, the place I had once lived before leaving for good. The door opened, and the first person I saw was Emily. She stood there, her eyes scanning me with a calculating look. "Wow, you look pretty successful." It wasn't exactly a compliment. More like a veiled jab. Stepping inside, I saw my mother and Richard sitting at the dining table, their smiles a little too bright. The aroma of food filled the air, the atmosphere seemed warm, but something felt off. "Oh, sweetheart, you look wonderful," my mother said, stepping forward to hug me, but the embrace was awkward, unfamiliar. "We have so much to talk about, darling." We sat down, and dinner started with polite small talk. My mother asked about my job. Richard nodded approvingly as I mentioned my recent successes. Emily sat beside me, her eyes studying me like she was trying to guess how much money I was making. I wasn't stupid. I knew they didn't actually care about me. They cared about something else. And then, my mother got to the point. "Emily mentioned that you've been saving quite a bit, right?" She set down her fork and knife, her voice sweet. Too sweet. I paused. "How do you know that?" Emily shrugged. "I stopped by your apartment the other day. I happened to see you checking your bank account on your laptop." She smiled. "I didn't mean to snoop, but... wow. That's an impressive number." I tightened my grip around my glass of water. "So that's what this dinner is about?" My mother feigned surprise. "Oh, Hannah. Don't think like that. I was just thinking, maybe you could help Emily a little." I met her gaze. "Help her how?" She cleared her throat, pretending to hesitate. "You know, Emily is about to graduate college. She needs a place to stay, to start her life. We found a wonderful apartment, but the price is a bit high." Richard chimed in, his voice calm yet calculated. "With the money you have, you could help her put down a deposit. It's really nothing compared to your income. Families help each other, don't they?" I set my glass down firmly. "You're saying I should use my savings to buy Emily an apartment?" I enunciated every word, my tone filled with disbelief. "Oh, don't put it like that," my mother said with a forced laugh. "It's just a little support. After all, you already have a stable job. Emily is still struggling. As her sister, shouldn't you help her out?" I laughed, a dry, humorless laugh. "Do you have any idea how hard I worked for that money?" I looked at each of them. "I worked 2 jobs in college. I stayed up all night finishing projects. I skipped vacations, fancy meals. I saved every penny. And now you expect me to just hand it over for Emily's apartment?" Emily shrugged. "You don't need that much money. You live alone. It's not like you have a family to support." "Which is exactly why I don't need to buy a house for anyone but myself," I said firmly. The air in the room turned ice cold. My mother set down her utensils, her gaze sharp. "You're really not going to help your sister?" No. I stood up, no longer bothering with pleasantries. That money is mine. And I'm only going to use it for myself. My mother stared at me, then took a deep breath. When she spoke again, her voice was icy. Hannah, you're incredibly selfish. I never thought my mother could be so shameless. That dinner confirmed what I had already suspected. They never actually cared about me. They only cared about my money. But even though I had refused them outright, I never expected that they would resort to stealing it. I had given them too much credit. 2 weeks later, I left for Singapore on an important business trip. It was a huge opportunity for my career, and I threw myself completely into preparing for it. The days flew by with a packed schedule, meetings, financial analyses, late-night negotiations. I barely had time to check my phone, let alone log into my bank account. It wasn't until I landed back at the airport, switched on my phone, and saw the flood of notifications on my screen that I realized something was very, very wrong. Bank account, withdrawal, $5,000. Bank account, withdrawal, $12,500. Bank account withdrawal, $22,000. I felt my heart clench. This couldn't be happening. I rushed into a taxi, my hands trembling as I opened my banking app. My account balance had been drained. Massive transactions sent to an unfamiliar account. But the name that appeared on my screen ignited a fury inside me. Patricia Warren. My mother? I froze for a moment, but then shock gave way to rage. How dare she? How could she transfer such a large sum from my account? Then it hit me. The key. I had been stupid enough to let her into my apartment a few weeks ago. That day, she had asked to use the restroom, and I hadn't thought twice about it. It only took a few minutes for her to make a copy of my key. She had planned this all along. I didn't drive home. Instead, I drove straight to her house. I pounded on the door so hard my hand went numb. Richard opened it, his smug, condescending expression making my blood boil. "Oh, Hannah. Back from Singapore already?" I shoved the door open and stormed into the living room. My mother sat there, calmly sipping her tea, as if she were completely innocent. "You stole my money." I thrust my phone in front of her, my voice shaking with fury. "How did you access my account?" She didn't even blink. "Do you even hear yourself? I just borrowed it." My entire body trembled with anger. "Borrowed? You transferred over $30,000 into your account. How do you call that borrowing?" She sighed, setting her teacup down. "Hannah, you're overreacting. You make plenty of money, you'll earn it back in no time." Richard nodded in agreement. "Exactly. Don't be so selfish. That money is to help your sister get a good start in life." I felt my face burn with rage. "Give it back. Now." I enunciated every word, my voice cold and firm. "Or, I won't let this go." My mother looked at me as if I had just said something ridiculous. "And what will you do, call the police on your own mother?" I didn't answer immediately. I just looked at her for a long moment, as if seeing a stranger. Then, I pulled out my phone. "I already called the bank to report fraudulent transactions. They're freezing your account as we speak." For a split second her face paled. But then she forced herself to appear unfazed. "You wouldn't dare sue your own mother," she scoffed, giving me a knowing smirk. "You know that, don't you, Hannah?" I slipped my phone back into my pocket and turned toward the door. But before I left, I stopped and looked at her one last time. "You think I won't?" I said slowly. "Then just wait and see." And with that I walked out, leaving that house, and the people inside it, behind me. The trial took place on a freezing morning, but inside the courtroom the air was suffocatingly tense. I sat in the plaintiff's seat, my back straight, eyes fixed forward. My mother stood before the judge, feigning exhaustion, her eyes glistening as if she were truly remorseful. "Your Honor, I never meant to hurt my daughter." Her voice trembled, as if the slightest breeze could make her collapse. "I only wanted to help my family. I wasn't thinking clearly." I clenched my fists, a wave of disgust rising in my chest. This wasn't remorse. This was just a cheap performance. The judge remained unfazed. He looked at my mother, flipping through the documents on his desk, before speaking in a calm yet authoritative voice. "Mrs. Warren, you exploited your daughter's trust to steal over $30,000 from her personal account. This cannot be dismissed as a minor mistake." My mother began to shed tears, as if she were truly desperate. I just thought she could earn it back easily. Hannah has a good job, a bright future, but Emily, she's still struggling to start her life. I let out a cold laugh. So there it was. The truth behind everything. I had never been her priority. My lawyer, a sharp middle-aged man named Daniel Harper, leaned forward. "Your Honor, the defendant had no intention of returning the money until she was caught and threatened with prosecution." He turned his gaze directly to my mother. "And clearly, even now, Mrs. Warren shows no real remorse. She regrets being caught, not what she did." I saw my mother flinch at his words. She knew she had no argument left. The judge struck the gavel. "Mrs. Warren, the court finds you guilty of unlawful appropriation of funds. Given that this is a first-time offense, the court will grant probation. However, you are required to repay the full amount to the plaintiff within 30 days. Failure to do so will result in more severe penalties." Silence filled the courtroom. My mother's face turned pale, her lips pressing into a tight line, as if she were swallowing something bitter. Richard sat beside her, his expression frozen, while Emily glared at me, as if I were the one in the wrong. I didn't care. When the trial ended, I stepped out of the courthouse feeling not exactly relieved, but no longer in pain either. A hand rested on my shoulder. "My father?" "You did the right thing, Hannah," he said, his voice warm. "I'm proud of you." Elizabeth stood beside him, her eyes gentle. Ethan crossed his arms, raising an eyebrow at me. "So, you finally kicked them out of your life for good, huh?" I nodded. It was over. The very next day, I went to my lawyer's office and filed a restraining order against my mother, Richard, and Emily. I wasn't giving them another chance. No more pleading messages. No more fake apologies. No more contact. My mother could continue living her life, but from now on, I would no longer be a part of it. 3 months after the trial, I held the keys to my first home. A small colonial-style house with a wide porch, nestled in a quiet neighborhood. Not far from where my father and Elizabeth lived, close enough that I could visit any time, yet far enough to have my own space. A small backyard, where I could plant flowers or simply sit and read in the late afternoon. I stood in front of the white-painted wooden door, taking a deep breath. Everything I had today I had earned, on my own. No one had given me anything. And no one could take it away from me ever again. My dad pulled up behind me, stepping out with a large box in his hands. "You planning to stand there all day?" he teased, raising an eyebrow. Elizabeth walked up, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Welcome home, Hannah." Those 2 words made me pause. Not a temporary apartment. Not a place where I had been treated like an outsider. This was home. A real home. That evening, I opened the first bottle of wine in my new home. Ethan tossed a pillow onto the couch and plopped down as if he had always belonged there. "You know, this house suits you perfectly." I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "It's simple but strong." He shrugged. "Like you. Not flashy, but it can stand through anything." I laughed, but a strange warmth settled in my chest. My dad poured more wine into my glass. "You've done something that many people never can," he said, looking at me with pride in his eyes. "You've built a life for yourself, one where no one can manipulate or take advantage of you anymore." I glanced around the room. The people sitting here weren't related to me by blood, yet they had stood by me through my hardest years. And in that moment, I understood something. Family isn't just the people who bring you into this world. It's the people who love, cherish, and stand by you. I still received messages from my mother, but I never responded. She had repaid the money as ordered by the court, but beyond that, I wanted no further contact. the final ties had been severed. I felt no regret. I had spent my entire childhood hoping my mother would change, that she would love me the way she loved Emily. But now, I understood that some things would never change, and that wasn't my fault. Letting go doesn't mean failure. Sometimes, it's the only way to protect yourself. 2 weeks later, I hosted a small housewarming party. Elizabeth arranged the food in the kitchen, my dad checked the electrical system to make sure everything was running smoothly, and Ethan cracked open a beer, lounging halfway across the wooden chair on the porch. "Hannah, I never thought you'd come this far," he joked, winking at me. I looked up at the clear blue sky, a quiet smile forming on my lips. "Neither did I," I said, my voice soft, but certain. "But now, I know I can do anything." Hannah's story isn't just about escaping the manipulation and exploitation of her biological family. It's a testament to the power of independence and resilience. She chose to build her own life rather than cling to toxic relationships. In reality, many people face betrayal from the very ones who are supposed to love them the most. But the most important thing is that we have a choice to keep enduring the pain, or to take control and walk away. Sometimes, family isn't where we are born, it's where we find love and respect. What do you think about Hannah's story? If you were in her position, what would you do? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to follow the channel so you won't miss more thought-provoking stories about life, family, and the lessons we learn along the way.